You're standing on a riverbank in what is now Sudan. The water behind you has been dropping for longer than anyone alive can remember. Across the river, on the far bank, another group is watching the same shrinking water you are. For a while, both sides just watch each other. Then the group on the far side starts moving toward the water. Not walking, running. Spears come up. Bare feet kick dust into the air. You don't get long to react before the first arrow lands. By the time the sun goes down, dozens of bodies are lying along that riverbank. This isn't a reenactment. This isn't a legend. This happened on the bank of the Nile at a place archaeologists now call Jebel Sahaba. And it happened roughly 13,000 years ago. An archaeologist named Fred Wendorf excavated the site in the 1960s, and the people who died there left their bones behind for him to find. There are 61 skeletons. Men, women, children. Most of them carry the marks of a violent death. Stone arrowheads are still wedged between vertebrae. Skulls are crushed in from a direct blow. And here's the part that should stop you. Some of those wounds had already healed by the time these people finally died. That means they survived one attack, and then lived long enough to be attacked again. One of those skeletons belonged to a woman. She had 4 separate wounds that had fully healed while she was alive. The 5th wound is the one that killed her. Jebel Sahaba may be the oldest confirmed massacre site in the entire human story. And it raises a question that archaeologists have argued over for decades. Why did this start? Not just here. Everywhere, eventually. Why did human beings start organizing themselves specifically to kill other human beings? For most of the 20th century, the answer seemed obvious. Cavemen fought constantly. The thinking went over territory, food, and mates. Violence was just supposed to be baked into us. That was the assumption for a long time. Then archaeologists actually started counting the bodies. In one large review of the evidence, anthropologists Jonathan Haas and Matthew Piscitelli examined more than 2,900 skeletons pulled from sites that existed before farming was invented. Those sites cover hundreds of thousands of years of human life, spread across multiple continents. And the rate of violent death in that record was low. Not zero, but low. Far lower than the violent caveman image would have predicted. For roughly 290,000 years, there is almost no evidence anywhere on the planet of organized group violence between humans. Individual fights? Yes. Accidents, animal attacks, occasional one-on-one killings, all of that shows up. But coordinated, group-against-group warfare? Barely a trace. Then, right around the end of the last ice age, the record changes. At Jebel Sahaba, 13,000 years ago, that shift is already visible in the bones. And it keeps showing up in completely different places for thousands of years afterward. In what is now Austria, around 5000 BCE, at a site called Asparn-Schletz, an entire early farming settlement was wiped out in a single attack. The bodies were left exactly where they fell. Nobody came back to bury them. In Germany, at a site called Talheim, archaeologists uncovered a pit holding 34 people, men, women, and children, their skulls smashed in from behind, while they were apparently trying to run. And in South Dakota, at a site called Crow Creek, around 1325 CE, close to 500 people were killed in a single coordinated attack, scalped, mutilated, thrown together into a mass grave. These were not isolated accidents. These were entire communities erased in a single organized assault, sites separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Different continents, different centuries, the exact same pattern. So picture what that actually means. Violence did not appear the moment humans first showed up on this planet. It showed up much later. And once it showed up, it kept getting worse. Why? For most of the Paleolithic, the long stretch of the Stone Age before farming existed at all, you had small groups of people and enormous amounts of open land. If food ran low in one place, Your group could simply move to another. Fighting was expensive. You could lose people you would never be able to replace. Hunters, mothers, the one person who knew where the good water was. So moving on was almost always the smarter bet. Why risk a fight when the next valley over still has food in it? But two things changed at the same time, right in the window when Jebel Sahaba was attacked. The climate at the end of the Ice Age turned unstable, swinging hard and fast. Entire ecosystems collapsed. The large animals people had hunted for countless generations began disappearing. At the same time, human populations had grown. And in the richest remaining spots, river valleys, coastlines, lake shores, groups started doing something new. They stopped moving. They settled down. Picture that shift for a second. One generation grows up learning to read the land, to follow the herds, to leave a place once it stops giving. The next generation grows up in the same hut their whole life, next to the same stretch of river, with a store of dried fish stacked in the corner. Once you settle, you cannot simply walk away when things get hard. You have a home. You have stored food. You have something to lose, for the first time in the history of your species. And that is the exact moment the math on violence flips completely. Attacking another group stops being dangerous and starts being profitable. Their stored grain, their fishing grounds, their stretch of river, all of it becomes worth fighting for and worth dying to protect. Researchers call this the resource competition hypothesis, the idea that organized violence appears once there is suddenly something concentrated enough and scarce enough to be worth taking by force. Jebel Sahaba fits that idea almost perfectly. A river valley. A climate collapse happening in the background. A population with nowhere left to retreat to. One group attacked again, and again, and again. Farming made all of this worse, not better. A group that is always moving cannot stockpile very much. You carry everything you own on your own back. But once you plant a field and fill a storage pit with grain, you have created something that never existed before in human history. Something that can be taken. Something worth raiding. Something worth dying to defend. That single shift, a surplus that the group next door does not have, may be the exact spark that turned occasional violence into organized warfare. So here is what the actual evidence adds up to. For roughly 290,000 years, there is almost no sign of organized human violence anywhere on this planet. Then the climate collapsed, populations grew, and the people who used to move started staying put. And the moment people had a home and a harvest worth losing, taking it from someone else stopped being unthinkable. For the first time in the human story, it became worth the risk. The woman from Jebel Sahaba lived once. She had a fire to sit beside. She had people around her. She survived 3 separate attacks on her community, then a 4th, and kept living anyway. She did not choose any of this. Her people were hunter-gatherers camped beside a shrinking river, in a world that had stopped being generous. And somewhere across that water, someone decided that what her people had left was worth taking by force. That is how the first confirmed war in human history appears to have started. Not with a declaration, not with an ideology, not with a flag, or a cause, or a grievance written down anywhere. With a river, a shortage, and the oldest calculation our species has ever made. That taking is easier than sharing. That calculation did not stay buried in the Stone Age. It just kept finding new excuses to resurface. In 1462, a Wallachian ruler named Vlad III, the man history remembers as Vlad the Impaler, used that exact same logic against an invading Ottoman army. Chronicles from the period describe Ottoman soldiers marching toward his capital and finding a field stretching for miles, filled with thousands of impaled bodies. A deliberate, horrifying message about the price of taking his territory. Historians still argue over the exact number of bodies. Nobody argues about the strategy. Fear, deployed as a weapon to protect land and resources from people who wanted to take them. 13,000 years separate Jebel Sahaba from that field outside his capital. The calculation behind both of them barely changed at all. So when did war actually start? Not the moment humans first appeared on Earth. Not because violence was always sitting underneath us, waiting. It started the moment the world stopped feeling generous enough to share. And somebody decided that taking was simply easier. You are still living in a version of that same world. Resources still run thin. Borders still get drawn hard and defended harder. Somewhere, right now, someone is deciding that the people on the other side of a line have something worth seizing. The weapons have changed completely. Spears became arrows, became swords, became something far worse. But the calculation behind them has not changed at all. It is the oldest story our species has ever told itself, and we are still writing it. One decision at a time. You're standing on a riverbank again. Only this time, the river is just a metaphor, and the question it's asking you hasn't changed in 13,000 years. What do you do when there isn't enough to go around, and someone else has what you need?